In my journey of gaining freedom from the ego, I have encountered one thing, which is the language of feelings. So, in this episode, I'm going to be talking more deeply into the topic of the language of feelings and to see if the language of feelings can really talk to us and how can they give us freedom from the ego. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Freedom from the Ego. So, in the last episode, we talked about the language of feelings, but I felt like we didn't do it justice because I knew the language of feelings was something that I genuinely developed and it became like sort of a vocabulary. But I didn't understand how it spoke to me. I didn't understand how it was able to sniff out a lot of things that became evident that they were delusions. But I just felt things over here and I didn't understand it quite well. So in this episode, I'm going to try to do my best to explain the language of feelings. If we understand the basic motivation behind delusions and why we do things which we don't want to do is because of social pressure. Social pressure and the stories we tell ourselves, our egos, the separation that it provides us, basically pushes us to do things that we don't necessarily want to do. And in that, we basically end up going towards the directions where we feel unhappy or unsafe or end up committing to things that we don't really want to commit to. And I am the worst example for this. I'm actually the best example for this because I told myself a lot of stories that really didn't resonate with what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be in life. And that's why this thing is important. And so the language of feelings are able to basically give us a real good ground reality check to see if we are going down the path of delusion, which we don't want to go towards, or if you're going down the path where we actually want to go. And the language of feelings have the capacity to basically explain to you if you're going in the right path or the wrong path, a path that makes you happy or a path that makes you sad. How do delusions work? If we want to understand delusions, we need to understand a river. A river is a lot of water flowing very quickly and it has a lot of rocks. If you're swimming in the river, you're going to hit a bunch of rocks. And delusion or being in an emotional state can be considered as swimming in the river. When you're swimming in the river, you don't know where you're going, the flow just pushes you here and there and you get pulverized by the rocks. The rocks are the emotions. And so if we try to understand our emotional states and our emotional journeys as when we embody those feelings and we get carried away by those feelings, we are basically swimming in the river. And having a meta perspective and seeing and being disconnected from those feelings can be considered as flying above the river, seeing it from a bird's eye view and not being affected by the waves or the rocks. So this is how you can imagine the emotions or the emotional states affecting you in terms of a river. So in order to understand the structure of an emotional state, we need to understand how our emotional states come to us. Basically, an emotional state is not an exclusive event. An emotional state is not something which is just a one-time thing. An emotional state is something that happens to you when we are in a situation and the emotions basically come to us in terms of cycles. What are cycles? Cycles are basically like weather. So if you're a kid and it's the first time that you're seeing snowfall, it's obviously a magical event for you, but and you don't really know what to expect coming forwards. But as you grow older, you tend to expect a lot of things. You tend to expect that, okay, fall has started, the leaves have started falling, and you can sort of expect that the snowfall will come, and then spring comes, the leaves come back, and summer comes, and monsoon and everything. So basically, emotions are like that. Emotions are like weather cycles. And the more we are experienced, the more we experience those weather cycles, we can actually start to see the patterns. The second cycle. Well, the second cycle is important. And it's important because that is when mostly, it's not necessary, but mostly the second cycle is when we get to actually understand that our emotions are playing with us, that it's not absolute reality, that it's not that we are actually swimming in the river and it's not, we're not flying above it. And the river has the control over us. And so that is when we actually recognize the control of emotions over us. And that is when we begin to see the structure of an emotional state. In order to understand the structure of an emotional state, I need to tell you a little example. Consider that you're working in your office and a colleague comes by and he's like, yo, I need a little help right now. I need some help with typing up this email, and I'm really nervous about talking to this client, and I really need your help because you have got good grammar. I really need your help, and I've got not enough time, or this and that. So he tells you a story. That story is, your mind basically takes that story and brings it down to just one point. This guy needs help, okay? And you're a person who helps people. So that is the story. The other part is you feel an emotion attached with that story. When you're feeling like you want to help this guy, you feel a certain emotion, and that is important. So the structure of an emotional state is that it's a story plus an emotion. So the emotion may be that you're feeling a little warm, a little fuzzy, or very nice. You feel like, oh, I'm trying to help this guy. You basically you have an emotional state, and you're pretty familiar with recognizing it whenever you feel it. And so now that we understand the structure of a emotional state, we need to understand the power of acceptance. The power of acceptance allows us to basically disconnect from our delusions. When we are living our lives as normal human beings, we tell ourselves a lot of things which are not true to how we actually are, a lot of things which are not coherent with reality. And so this thing, obviously helping people is a great thing. That story, there's nothing wrong with helping people. But consider this example, that this coworker basically starts to abuse you by obviously asking you a lot of times to do the things that he doesn't actually want to do, that he has time to do, but he doesn't actually want to do. It creates a separation between reality and the story that is in your head. And it's going to take a lot of emotional distress to basically recognize that, wait a second, there's something wrong is happening around here. Something's off. I don't like the feeling that is happening. Maybe you catch a glimpse of him playing on his phone while you're working on his, elaborately typed email that you working hard to write because you want to help this guy. And so when the story does not match the reality, a lot of emotional distress starts to come about. And when you start to see this pattern repeatedly, then you will actually start to recognize how this person is basically manipulating. So the power of acceptance comes when you need to tell yourself that, no, even though I'm a guy who helps people, I need to sometimes stand back. I need to disassociate with my label that I've given to myself. The power of acceptance allows you to reach a conclusion which may be not in accordance with what you believe that you are. And so the power of acceptance allows you to look at reality the way it is, basically allowing you to connect the story to the reality, allowing you to have a more realistic worldview. So when do emotions become a language? So as I told you before, the structure of an emotional state is a story plus an emotion. And so when you go through the second cycle and you recognize the emotion that is attached with this story, you tend to basically have a vocabulary set up in your mind. You tell yourself that, okay, whenever I feel this emotion, this strong emotion, chances are that I am being manipulated, or I am feeling angry, or I'm being ignorant, or I'm being this, or I'm being that. The more experiences you go through, the more second cycles, third cycles, fourth cycles you go through, the more complex, the more elaborate your understanding of reality becomes, the more elaborate your system of recognizing emotion becomes. And so in an emotional state, once you are used to recognizing an emotion and associating that emotion with a story, it's pretty easy for you to basically recognize the story even though you don't know the story. So take example of someone you're dating, and this girl starts to play victim whenever you have certain boundaries, and you're not that close, and you have certain boundaries, and you don't like to basically mingle very quickly, and so you take your time, and then this person starts to make you feel guilty, makes you start to feel a little bad. And in the first cycle, you're like, oh, I'm such a bad guy, because I'm leaving her, I'm not being loyal, I'm not being this, that. When the second cycle comes, you're like, I see a little pattern around here. Someone is making me feel bad to keep me around. And so you leave this person, for example, and you date someone else. When someone else comes and they basically do the same thing, and the same emotion is introduced into you, you have the power to recognize the story, which is that she is a victim and she's playing victim, even before you understand that there's some sort of emotional game going on. You have the ability to recognize that vocabulary, that word, that emotional state with manipulation, with not liking that stuff. You have your associations, whether you like it or not. And so with your past experiences and with your vast vocabulary of words, in a way, words, you're able to recognize stories even before they come up, even before they surface. And you have this insane ability to basically see emotional states even before they come up. And so this is the power of having a lot of experiences, a lot of delusions, and having to go through a lot of cycles, like first, second, third, fourth, fifth. And so the more we are well versed into the cycles of emotional states, the more elaborate our vocabulary of emotions is. And so the more developed our language of emotions is, the more nuanced our understanding can be about living our day-to-day lives, and having the ability to have consciousness whenever a time comes when you're not being conscious, when things are not looking good in terms of freedom from the ego. And so this thing will allow you to basically become a more peaceful human being, a lot more self-conscious human being, not self-conscious, conscious human being. And this will help you to gain freedom from the ego much more quickly, because you're well versed into the vocabulary of your emotions. Our emotional states and our delusions consist of two objects, a story and an emotion. Once we are able to understand an emotion, we are able to relate that emotion to other stories, other situations, where we are able to detect basically delusions and emotional states and lack of consciousness even before it occurs. And we can become like the bird that is flying above the river, not someone who is flowing or being thrown or tossed inside the river. And that is very important to recognize. Thank you so much for watching the 7th episode of the Freedom from Ego, and I will see you next week. Thank you.